Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, I want to start with a bit of a challenge. If I put you on the spot right now and asked you to define the word peace, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
It's good to be here. And I imagine for most people, the answer is pretty immediate. It's quiet.
Yeah, quiet.
It's a beach with no cell service. Or maybe, on a more serious note, it's just the absence of war.
Right. That's the default setting for most of us. We define peace by what it isn't. No noise, no fighting, no stress. It's a negative definition, the absence of bad stuff.
Exactly.
But we've been reading through today's source material, and I have to say, it completely upends that definition.
It really does. We are looking at an excerpt from Rhapsody of Reality's Daily Devotional by Pastor Chris Oyakhilome, specifically an entry titled Ambassadors of Peace. And the clear argument here is that peace isn't an absence at all. It's a presence. It's a tangible, active substance.
A substance. That's the word that stuck with me, because usually substances are things I can hold, weigh, or measure. But this text treats peace like a piece of technology, something you carry, something you deliver. And this is the part that sounds almost like science fiction, something that can be returned to you if the delivery fails.
It's a fascinating framework.
Hmm.
And, regardless of your personal spiritual background, the mechanics the author lays out here are worth unpacking
Why is that?
because they shift the reader from a passive role, just, waiting for things to calm down, to an active role. You aren't just a consumer of peace. You are an ambassador.
An ambassador isn't just a fancy job title in this context. It implies you're carrying something from one place to another. But let's get into the how of it, because the text starts with a very specific instruction that honestly kind of annoyed me at first.
Oh, why is that?
Well, it anchors the whole argument in Luke 10:5. The verse says, "And into whatsoever house ye enter, first say, Peace be to this house." And the emphasis is on that phrase.
First say?
First say, yes.
The author is very explicit about this. He writes, he didn't say to wish it silently or to think it. He said to say it because there's power in your words.
See, that's the hurdle. We live in a world where thoughts and prayers is kind of a cliche, but generally we think of spiritual intent as an internal thing. If I want to wish you well, I can just think it, right? Why does this text insist that if I don't open my mouth, the mechanism fails?
Well, it touches on a theological concept often called divine utterance. In this worldview, authority is forensic. It's legal. Think about a courtroom.
Okay.
A judge can sit on the bench and internally believe a defendant is guilty. He can wish it with all his heart. But until he audibly speaks the verdict and bangs the gavel,
Nothing happens.
the legal reality of the room doesn't shift. Nothing changes.
So it's about execution.
Precisely. The text argues that the reader is operating with heaven's authority. And authority, in this context, must be audible to be effective. It says, you speak with heaven's authority. You're a conduit.
Right.
You can't deliver the package if you never open the delivery truck.
Okay, that courtroom analogy helped. It's less about vibes and more about issuing a decree. But this leads us to what I think is the most mind-bending part of this entire deep dive. I'm calling it the physics of peace.
I assume you're talking about the boomerang effect.
Yes. The text quotes the very next verse, Luke 10:6. And it lays out a scenario that sounds like an Amazon return policy. Can you walk us through that?
Okay, so the verse says, if the Son of Peace be there, your peace shall rest upon it. If not, it shall turn to you again.
Okay.
The author takes this ancient text and draws a very mechanical conclusion from it. Peace is transferable.
Transferable, meaning it moves from point A to point B.
Correct. It's described as a divine substance, specifically the peace of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
When you speak, you aren't just making a sound, you are technically releasing a resource into the environment.
But there's a variable,
There is. The recipient. The text mentions a son of peace.
which I took to mean someone receptive, someone who wants the package.
That's the implication. But the fascinating part is the contingency plan. What happens when you walk into a hospital room? Or you try to speak peace to a relative who just wants to fight?
Usually I'd say I wasted my time, I'd feel drained, I tried to be the bigger person, they snapped at me, and now I'm exhausted.
And that is the standard human experience of rejection. It's a depletion. But this text argues the exact opposite. It says, if the peace isn't received,
What?
it returns to you full and intact.
Full and intact. I want to pause on that because it completely reframed social interaction.
It does. It suggests that the ambassador is carrying a resource that cannot be destroyed by rejection
It can only be accepted.
or returned.
Think about the psychological weight of that. If I believe my peace is just my own emotional energy, I'm going to be stingy with it.
Of course.
I'm not going to waste my good mood on a grumpy coworker. I'm hoarding my peace because I don't want to run out.
That's the sunk cost fear. We don't want to invest where there is no return.
Exactly. But this text is saying, no, you're just the courier. If they reject the package, you don't lose the package. It comes back to the truck. Actually, it comes back to you.
And if we follow that logic to its conclusion, it gets even more interesting. If the piece returns to you full and intact, that implies that the ambassador can never be depleted by the hostility of others.
That is wild. It basically gamifies conflict.
In a way, yes. Imagine you spend your whole day speaking peace to a turbulent world traffic, angry bosses, bad news, and let's say half the world rejects it.
Okay.
According to this text, that peace returns to you. You aren't drained. You are potentially accumulating a massive reservoir of this substance.
So it turns the act of blessing others into a fail-safe mechanism for your own well-being. Even if they spit in your face, you benefit because the peace you released has nowhere else to go but back to you.
It removes the victim mentality. The text emphasizes that you are an oasis of peace in a troubled world. An oasis doesn't dry up just because the desert is hot.
It has a source.
It has a source. And in this text, the source is internal, but the flow is activated by speech.
So we've established the mechanism. You have to say it. We've established the physics. It returns if rejected. But the source material doesn't just want us to practice this in our living rooms. It scales up.
Right.
And honestly, this is where I got a little skeptical.
Skeptical now.
Well, it moves from the micro, the house, mentioned in Luke 10, to the macro, nations. The text explicitly says to use the same pattern, to pray for cities and countries.
It does. It broadens the scope significantly.
But does the text really argue that me, standing in my kitchen saying, peace be upon Russia, actually does anything? Or is that just, symbolic?
The author seems to take it quite literally. I mean, he lists specific nations: Bulgaria, Nigeria, Ghana, Hungary, Poland, Russia, the UK, the US.
This is a very eclectic list.
It is, and I think that's deliberate. The argument is that spiritual authority isn't bound by geography. If you are an ambassador, your diplomatic immunity and your voice carry weight in the spiritual realm, regardless of your physical location.
It's interesting that he lists those specific places. It feels like spinning a globe and stopping your finger at random spots.
I think the specificity is the point. Specificity breeds intent. It's easy to say, I hope for world peace. That's a bumper sticker, costs you nothing.
True.
But to say, peace be upon Nigeria, requires a conscious direction of will.
It forces you to look at the map.
And it shifts the listener from being a passive observer of world events, doom scrolling on your phone, feeling anxious about headlines, to being an active participant.
So you're not just watching the news.
The text says to speak peace to the nations of the world. It's a mandate.
It effectively tells the reader, don't just watch the news, talk to the news.
And notice the tone instructions. Declare it boldly. An ambassador doesn't ask permission to represent their country. They just represent it.
It is empowering.
The text is empowering the individual to believe their voice impacts geopolitics, even if it's just on a spiritual level.
But I want to drill down on what peace means in this context, because if we are speaking peace to a nation like, say, the US or Russia, are we just wishing for everyone to be nice?
This is where we have to look at the definitions again. The author quotes John 14:27, where Jesus distinguishes between the peace the world gives and the peace he gives.
Not as the world giveth, right?
Right. Worldly peace is usually just a truce. It's a pause in the fighting. It's fragile. But the text describes this divine peace as something that surpasses understanding. And crucially, it links this peace to power.
Yeah, that line jumped out at me. Peace also means power over crisis.
It equates peace with power over turbulence. And the text references Mark 4.39, the story where Jesus calms the storm. He speaks to the wind and waves.
He talks to the weather. Again, that spoken word aspect.
Exactly. He doesn't just meditate the storm away. He speaks to the environment. Peace, be still. The text encourages the reader to use that same authority over their own raging negative circumstances. But then, and this is a pivot that I think surprises a lot of readers, it connects this storm-calming power to something else.
The prosperity connection.
Yes.
I have to admit, when I read this part, my radar went up a bit. Usually when I hear peace and prosperity in religious texts, it feels like a sales pitch.
Be religious, get rich.
Yeah. But does the text actually make a logical connection here, or is it just promising goodies?
It's a bit more nuanced than a simple transaction. The text says, his peace always comes with prosperity. For peace and prosperity are bound together in divine harmony.
Bound together, so you can't have one without the other.
In this framework, they are symbiotic, and if we strip away the theology for a second and just look at it analytically, it holds up.
How so?
Think about a nation or even a business. Can you have true, sustainable prosperity in the midst of chaos?
No. If you're in a civil war, you aren't building factories, you're just trying to survive. Instability destroys value.
Exactly. Stability, which is the structural form of peace, is the substrate for growth. You cannot build on shaking ground. So when the text says they are bound in divine harmony, it's suggesting that this specific kind of peace, the power to calm the storm, the power to stabilize the environment, is the necessary foundation for any kind of flourishing.
So it's not magic money, it's infrastructure. Peace is the infrastructure that allows prosperity to travel.
That's a great way to put it. When the reader is instructed to speak peace to their family or their nation, they are effectively paving the road. They are declaring the stability required for success to arrive.
That makes the stakes feel a lot higher. It's not just about, I hope everyone gets along. It's, I am declaring the viability of this environment.
And that leads us to the practical application section. Because the author doesn't just leave this as high-level theory about nations and storms. There's a script.
The prayer section, it reads like a manifesto.
It is a declaration of identity. It guides the reader to say, I carry the peace of Christ everywhere I go.
That's that identity shift again. You aren't looking for peace, you are the carrier.
Then it says, I speak peace to my nation, to his leaders, and to all people.
To its leaders. That's interesting. It doesn't say to the leaders I agree with.
No, it's comprehensive. It covers the structure of the society, and then it zooms back in to the personal, the home, the family, and loved ones.
It covers all the bases. But what stands out to me here is the sheer proactivity of it. I mean, we live in a time where people feel incredibly helpless.
Yeah.
We see the headlines, we see the economy, and we feel small. But this text is handing the reader a tool and saying, you are not small, you are an ambassador.
It effectively removes the option of passivity. If you accept the premise of this text, you can't just be a victim of the atmosphere in the room. You are responsible for the atmosphere.
That's a heavy responsibility, though, responsible for the atmosphere. That sounds exhausting.
It can be, but consider the alternative. The alternative is being at the mercy of everyone else's bad mood. The text describes the believer as an oasis.
An oasis, right.
That means you bring the weather with you. You don't just endure the climate that's already there. You introduce a new climate.
Bring the weather with you. I like that. It reminds me of the line in the text about speaking over your own raging negative circumstances. It's acknowledging that the reader will face storms. It isn't promising a storm-free life.
No, and that's a critical distinction. The title Ambassador of Peace implies you are going into places that need peace.
Right.
You don't send ambassadors to places that are already perfectly aligned. You send them to conflict zones. The existence of the storm is the reason for the ambassador's presence, not a sign that they've failed.
That's a really helpful perspective. So if things are chaotic around you, it's not a sign that the prayer didn't work. It's a sign that you need to clock in and get to work.
Precisely. You need to start speaking first say, as the text reminds us.
I want to circle back to the first say concept one last time. It seems so simple, yet socially, it's really hard.
It is.
Imagine walking into a tense board meeting or a family argument and actually saying, peace to this house. You might get some weird looks.
You might. But remember, the text is emphasizing the spiritual mechanic. You don't necessarily have to shout it through a megaphone. But the audible release of words, even whispered, changes your own posture.
How so?
It moves you from defensive to offensive.
From bracing for impact to delivering a package?
And remember the return policy.
Yeah.
If the boardroom is hostile, if the family member rejects it,
the piece comes back to me, I keep the asset.
You really can't lose.
You know, before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with a final thought based on this return policy. We talked about how reassuring it is that the piece returns so we don't get drained. But let's spin that forward a bit.
Where are you going with this?
Well, the text says, if the piece isn't received, it returns to you full and intact. Now, imagine you live a life where you are constantly boldly speaking peace to the most turbulent, difficult, rejecting environments.
Oh, okay.
You're trying to give it away, and the world keeps saying no thanks.
Right. You're facing constant rejection.
Does that imply that the person who faces the most rejection, the ambassador who is constantly sent to the toughest storms, actually ends up possessing the greatest amount of peace?
That is a profound thought.
Hmm.
We usually think rejection depletes us. We think, I gave so much and got nothing back.
But under this law, rejection forces the resource back into your own account. It suggests that the act of giving it away, even when it feels futile, is actually the surest way to accumulate it.
It's a beautiful paradox. The more you try to empty yourself of peace for the sake of others, the more full you become, specifically because of the world's rejection.
It really changes how you look at a bad day. It's not a drain, it's a deposit.
Indeed. It turns the obstacle into the way.
Something to mull over as you go about your week.
Mm.
Be an ambassador. Speak boldly. And don't worry about the returns. Apparently, they're handled for you.
A powerful takeaway.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you next time.